I will not talk much longer because I want to give Alannah the floor, but I wanted to introduce her Fireside Chat. It has been a pleasure for me this last summer, spring and summer, to be working with her through this experiential learning course. This is actually what this this trip that she took with MCC was part of an experiential learning course for her. And so this presentation is actually her final assignment for this course. So you are witnessing the final presentation, and I know she will do very well. So Alannah will tell you much more, but this was a pretty interesting and I think transformative experience for her on this trip with MCC. And she's not necessarily going to get into all the details of the Mennonite Central Committee as an organization. So if you are wondering more about them later, you can always come and talk to Lewis or I if this piques your interest and you're thinking of a future experience learning course. But I will hand it over to Alannah.
Thanks for coming, everyone. So so I want to share a little bit about one of the experiences that I had this summer. So one of the many things that MCC does is a program called Uprooted. And it's a 3-week learning tour that's focused on migration and peace building. And so I'm more interested in when I started, I was more interested in the peace building aspect of the trip, and so that's kind of what drew me to it. But the theme as a whole is really interesting, and I'm glad that I got to learn. So before I get into the really important parts of the trip, I want to show a few of the highlights, a few of the surface highlights. So these cuties. So we were 9,000 feet up in the Guatemala mountains in a village called Tonina. And these guys were snuggling, and it was pretty cute. And we got to see, we did a few cultural activities mostly in Mexico. And so we got to see a few pyramids, and this is one of them. So this is the moon pyramid, and I was on top of the sun pyramid when I took this. So we got to climb up. And finally, you may know that Nacho Libre is one of my favorite movies, if not my favorite movie. And so I found a Nacho Libre mask at the market, and then we went to a Lucha Libre match, and it was incredible. I was pretty excited. So this is the blog, and so everyone who went on the trip kind of participated to write this blog together. So if you are interested in having another perspective other than mine on the trip, it's just mccuprooted.com, and I have a blog post on there too. So without further ado, oh no. Don't look at all the pictures yet. Is there a way to do this full screen? Yeah! Alright, so my trip. So the orientation was in Calgary, so I was there for a few days. And then we flew into Tapachula, Mexico, which is right near the Guatemalan border. So we spent a few days in Guatemala. We crossed over the border there. And then after Guatemala, we flew into Mexico City. And from there, we went to Arizona, where we stayed on the Mexican side of the border. But we stayed at a border town, Agua Prieta and Douglas, Arizona. So that's kind of a little bit of geography from where I was. So this is in Guatemala. So I'm going to highlight now a few of the more striking things that I experienced on this trip. So one of the things that we did in Guatemala was we met with a community who's being affected by the Canadian mines there. So I'm not sure if anyone knows about the Canadian mining situation abroad. So we had the opportunity to learn just a little bit about it. We were there for a few hours. So the community explained to us that the presence of the mines there has really split up their community. And so the mines were able to come they were able to deceive the people into having the land to mine. And so this is actually a photo. It looks like a lake, but it's actually toxic chemicals that they use to mine with. And so daily there's a whole bunch of bags of cement that are being poured in there to try to freeze it. So it's had a really huge environmental impact. They were telling us that a lot of the chemicals, this isn't the only place where the chemicals go. The mining chemicals are also put in the river. And so they're actually not able to drink the water now from their river. They have to get their water from other counties. On top of that, people have gotten sick from drinking the water. They were saying there were kids that after school they decided to go and take a swim in the river, and they can't walk and they have skin conditions now. They were saying that it's also affected some of their homes. So some of their homes have fallen down because of the instability of the mining. But of course the mining company isn't taking responsibility for any of it. So they're saying, well, you're getting sick because you have poor hygiene and your houses are falling down because you have poor infrastructure. So this is a photo of the mountain being mined. So it has an environmental impact, and also it just didn't look very nice. And this is, they're refilling a mountain in this picture. But the people aren't sure whether the soil is going to be fertile now that they're refilling the mountain. But it's interesting because they were saying that the community was divided on this issue because there's a group of people who are actively fighting against the presence of the mine. But there's also a group of people who are happy that it's there because it's creating jobs, and it's brought, a few good things to the community, but there's that tension there because you don't know what to believe. But we had the opportunity to listen, which was really cool. Another thing that we did after that is we took a trip up the mountain. This is where we saw the cats snuggling. So we took a trip up to a place called Tonina, and so this was a village, and previously they were growing a monocrop, and then they were selling that. They were selling their crop in the markets and using that money to buy their food. But now they're kind of in a process of revitalization, so MCC has helped them start to grow lots of different foods instead of just one thing. And so they showed us around their gardens. It was really cool. Their gardens are doing very well. They're experimenting with a few techniques. So now what they do is they actually sell flowers for their income, and they're able to get a lot of their food just from what they grow, which is really cool. So that was a little bit more hope-filled. And so one of their hopes for the gardens is actually that their kids will feel like they can stay. So one of the things we learned in orientation is that there's not one single migrant story. There's not one story that applies to everybody who's migrating. So I could be a migrant if I move to another province for work. I could be a migrant if I'm moving to another country because I don't feel like there's any opportunity. It doesn't look one certain way. So we learned about some of the big factors that do affect because there are a lot of people migrating from South America into the north. And so one of those big factors is that a lot of people feel like they don't have any opportunity at home. So the people in Tonina were hoping that these new gardening opportunities would allow their kids to stay. Because once people leave, it's a very dangerous journey. So a lot of people don't make it. A lot of times people won't hear back from their kids. Sometimes they come back, sometimes they don't. It's not, so it was hope-filled because there's more opportunity there. So after a few days in Guatemala, we went to Mexico City, where we did a lot of cultural activities, but we also got to visit a few migrant shelters. So a few places that were temporary places for migrants to stay as they go through their migrant journey. And one of the things I noticed was that there was a lot of art in the places that we went. And so I actually wrote my blog post about it. But I noticed that the art had humanizing ideas. I thought that it brought humanization to migrants. So one thing that I have learned through some of my classes here is about dehumanization. So what I understand of it is that dehumanization is when you see someone as less than a person for one reason or another. And a lot of times this is really easy to do when there are big issues that concern one group of people. So for example, with the Syrian migrant crisis, sometimes it's a lot easier to view people as a little less because it makes these situations easier to bear. But it's important not to do that. And so with migration, I find this is also, it's a little easier to do that sometimes when you see the pain of the situation. And so I found that these art pieces really brought humanity to the situation, and in this case it was through a religious perspective. And so this particular one was at a shelter called Cafe Min, and it was a shelter that was oriented towards women and children. And so this pictures Jesus. This is Jesus, everyone. And Jesus is carrying his cross, and these are migrants carrying their crosses as well. And in this one, we see Joseph and Mary and baby Jesus as they themselves were migrants. And it reminds us that in our own religious tradition, migration is a very important part of that. But I think that humanization needs to go a little bit further than that. I think it's a great message, and it's a great thing to remember that I'm connected to migration somehow, to migrants somehow. But I think that I need to base my view of someone else as human, not because I can relate to them, and not because I have personal experience, or I have friends, or I have family, but simply the fact that they are human. So after Mexico City, we flew into Phoenix, Arizona. And so we drove to Douglas, Arizona, which is a border town, so it borders Agua Prieta, Mexico. And so we were partnered with an organization called Frontera de Cristo, and what they do is they try to connect the two communities. One of the things that they do. So we stayed for, I think it was about a week. We stayed at a church in Mexico. And we got to do a bunch of different things, one of which was a border infrastructure tour. So this is on the Arizona side of the border. So this is the border wall. But this is what the border wall looks like when it's close to a city. This is what the border wall looks like when you drive a few minutes down the road and it's not right in the city. So it's not a big wall anymore. It's just to stop vehicles from going through. So the idea behind this, first of all, the wall isn't built to keep people out. It's built to slow people down. I could have climbed the wall really easily. It's not built to keep you out. The idea is to slow people down so that you can catch them and detain them. So close to the cities, they have the big wall, but outside of the cities, they have little walls, and the idea is that it is, what's the word? The idea is that, natural deterrence. So the idea is that you're more likely to cross in the city, and it's really dangerous to cross in the desert, but people do it. So this is us. We're now on the Mexico side, and we got to. There's an organization called PREDA, I believe, and they're a narcotics anonymous group. But one thing that they do is that they bring water out to the desert for migrants, and it's actually quite near the border. So for migrants to rest and get some water as they go on their journey, which is cool. So we got to go with them. We didn't actually help them bring out the water. They kind of did that, but we got to go with them. And so this is us walking through the desert just to get a little taste of what it's like. So all these like little plants have thorns on them, and they're pretty picky. And yeah, the desert's not the most ideal place to be walking through. So I can only imagine what it must be like to walk through for days and days. So this is a picture of the border wall up close. If you look really closely, you can see fingerprints all over the wall. That's from people climbing over. Okay, so probably the most powerful experience that I had on this trip has to do with these crosses. So one thing that there's a group of people in Douglas, Arizona that meet once a week, and they do a prayer vigil to remember all those who have died trying to cross. And so this is how they do it. They have a white cross for everyone that has been found, just in their county. And they've only been doing this for a few years. So it's an overwhelming amount of white crosses. And so we met, and they do this every week. We only did it once. But we met and we picked up some crosses, and what we would do is we stood in a line on the side of the road and we read out the name that was on the cross. So they put as much information as they can about the person that they find on the crosses. And so we read out their name, and then the rest of the group would reply, presente, so present, that person is here. And then we put the crosses on the side of the road, and we lined the road up to the border. So this is the border. And so we lined the road up to the border with the crosses, and then we met just right next to right in front of the border, and we prayed for the families. And so it's kind of their way to honor and remember the people that have died. And I found that to be very humanizing as well. So finally, I want to tie this into my essay a little bit, the essay that I wrote from the course. And so I noticed that in a lot of places that we went over the trip, there was art. And I thought it was really cool. And I got to thinking, what kind of role does art play as resistance to social injustice issues? So this is a picture of a mural painted on the Mexico side of the border. So that's the border wall, and it's painted beautifully with these butterflies. And so I don't know if you know, but monarch butterflies they're migrants as well. They have migration. So they come from Canada and the US, and they fly to Mexico for the winter, and then they come back. And so this mural reminds you of that when you look at it. And you remember the necessity and how natural it is for these butterflies to fly back and forth. And I found that it kind of brought a bit of beauty back into the pain and the ugliness of the situation. And so I got to thinking, one of the questions that I had as I was writing the essay is it worth it to make art, even if you don't know if it will have an impact? And that can be translated to a lot of other things. It's really easy to be discouraged when you learn about all the social injustice issues that are going on in the world. We hear about it a lot in IS, and it's easy to see yourself as really small and not able to make a difference. So I wondered, is it still important to do your part, so to make art in whatever way you take that? Is it still important to make art even if you don't know it will make a difference? So some of you are familiar with The Naked Pastor, David Hayward. So I did an interview with him just over Skype for my essay. And so I asked him that question, and I thought what he had to say about it was really cool, so I'm going to end with that. So he says, and I'm quoting, "If we have any integrity at all, and if we have any conscience left at all, we have to take a stand. Even if we can't be sure of the outcome, we have to hope for a good outcome. I get really nasty emails, and sometimes it makes me want to shrink back and just hide. But I was thinking the other day of Mahatma Gandhi, the fear and the rage and everything that could happen to him at that time. But instead he got up and began a protest that eventually led him to India. Here he is in an empire dominated by Britain, and he decides he's going to take it on. He couldn't have predicted that he was going to have any effect. But he stood and he did effect change. I think we should stand even if we're not sure of the outcome. Plus, we just have to be true to ourselves, and that's what artists do. They're expressing something from inside themselves. I think good art challenges us at our deepest and should either make us angry at what's going on or encourage us to do what's right, or just inspire us to love beauty and therefore make the world a better place." That's everything.
What part of your trip really touched you the most?
I think thinking about it after touched me. So like writing this essay was important. So that mural stood out to me. And also just knowing, so one of the things that I've noticed is a lot of times here we'll talk about the Syrian refugee crisis and how maybe the States isn't doing everything that could be done. So it's easy to paint Americans or whoever as people who don't care. But going to Douglas and being on the border and seeing this organization that's working to create connections between two peoples and who are doing this prayer vigil, it reminds me that, you know, there are people who care. No matter where you're from, there are people who care. Do you have any more questions?
I have another question. What were they mining in Guatemala that was so devastating?
So I think it was gold and silver. It was under Goldcorp. The Canadian mine was Goldcorp. Yeah, I'm thinking it was. I don't know if they specified that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Really
Thanks for listening.
great.
So would you recommend this kind of trip to other students?
Definitely. I didn't really know much about migration when I went on this trip. I still don't really know much about migration, but I know a little bit more. And I have, one thing I like to say when I come back from a trip, so when it was Asia or, you know, when it's this trip, is I have just a little bit more material to help me understand someone else better, and to help me connect to someone else better. And so I definitely think it was worth it.
Do you feel like Asia prepared you, or was it just a completely different experience than that?
I think in a way, just learning a little bit more how to relate to people who are different. Asia probably gave me a bit more experience in that. It is a completely different culture, but I think that there are skills and there are, you know, ideas and things that you learn that transcend that.
Hold on. Sorry, I've got another question. I don't know. We'll see how you want to answer it.
Yeah.
But I did a very short trip with Canadian Food Grains Bank a few years back, and it seemed like there was a similar kind of educational component. And one of the things that we talked about and that really impacted me, and so I'm wondering how it impacted you, was being somebody from Canada and being in a situation where your national identity is maybe caught up in some of, you know, the systems of oppression that you're visiting. And I know that was really impactful for me in my trip, and our leaders were really good about kind of talking us through that. So I was just curious about you, if you maybe you talked about that with your group, or you experienced that a little bit. Could you describe that?
Yeah. It was interesting. One thing they kind of told us was like, don't tell anyone you're Canadian. So I kind of like, I took my little Canada flag off my backpack, and you know, it made me uncomfortable. You know, I was like, I benefit from the fact that this is going on in your community. I have a gold ring. You know, maybe it was mined there. Like, I don't know. But it's a really uncomfortable thing to start to realize that sometimes you benefit from your society, and your society benefits from stepping on others. And I don't really know how to process that. But it's not a reality that should be forgotten, because it's too uncomfortable. And it's not a reality that should be, you know, that you need to sweep it under the rug, because it's too hard to live in that. But I don't know how to handle it yet. Probably never will, but.
An interesting point to make in that regard, when Alannah was there in May, some of us were in Timmins on another trip with MCC, also visiting gold core mining sites and talking about some positive work that is being done to work with Indigenous communities in Ontario. And when Alannah came back, and I have known the particular mine they visited in Guatemala is known internationally for a lot of human rights abuses, and if you follow Canadian mining, it's a particularly nasty situation. And so when we were visiting Gold Corp, we were trying to ask some questions about, you know, this is what you're doing in Canada, but what about internationally? And Lois and I and the group wrestled with that a lot, and then Alannah came back and we Skyped, and she told me where they went, and I thought, how complex this becomes, you know? But I do think what you're saying, I don't think Lois and I, after talking a long time about this and about the group that went to Colombia, and we've been in El Salvador and talked about Canadian mining, and I don't think we have an answer either, but just being aware, and like you were saying, not pushing it under the rug and saying, okay, what do we do when on one hand this company showed us where they're making progress in Canada, and we were kind of cheering on what they're doing, and on the other hand, we think, I can't condone any actions that you're doing. Well,
I'm just wondering if it's because there's a little more visibility and accountability closer to home, and so trips like Alannah that you're doing, it helps to extend that accountability a little bit.
And that dehumanization. You're certainly in Timmins, and the community rallied around because they said, this is the water we drink, so we really care. But I don't drink the water in Guatemala, so I don't have to care about it, right? You know, and so I think that is certainly a factor.
And it's interesting because, like, when a lot of times, like, we want to think like this thing is all good or this thing is all bad, and we don't want to. We kind of shut out the things that tell us that maybe that's not the case. But things are way more complex than that, and issues, social justice issues, are way more complex. I don't know what I think about the migration situation. I know there's a lot of pain and there's a lot of hurt, but I don't know, you know. So trying to be conscious of these different realities, and yet trying to do what's right.
just to add to the mining situation, so a few years ago, several times there have been legislation before the Canadian government that would hold Canadian mining companies to the same standards internationally that they're held to here. But it was defeated, but it will come back again. Yeah, so I mean that is a way to be promoting hopefully positive change, to understand the issue enough to maybe take some action, like writing to your MP or something to express support for those kinds of movements.
Good.
I think any kind of exposure, even you talking to us right now about this, just makes us more aware, and mining companies are getting public pressure, not just from governments, so that they are being forced in some way, in some cases, to think about how they look in public. So, yeah.
I think, Walter, when we were in Colombia, we had a conversation at the Canadian Embassy about Canadian mining companies in Colombia. And there was no hesitation. The person that we were talking to said the embassy's job is to promote Canadian interests. And if the Colombian government needs to hold Canadian companies accountable, that's up to them. That's not our concern. So that was pretty stark.
That's pretty stark.
Yeah. Yeah, and was no apology. It's like this is our job is to look after Canadian interests, and if the impact, human rights abuses, any of that for Colombia, that's their problem. So,
Just to add one other little twist to this thing, MCC giving visibility to issues like this under the previous government was denied a grant of millions of dollars. It's a little hard to say that because it's not absolutely clear that you can make the link between those two, but that's certainly what everyone believed. So interesting to the price that's paid,
to be a truth teller.
To be a truth teller, exactly.
Because this was a grant that MCC had had for years, and it was taken away.
And green lighted everywhere else, and then taken away.
And Alannah, I just want to say, I really appreciate this. Thank you. This last year, last couple of years that oil has been low in our economy, one of the things that has held our economy together has been that gold prices have been very high. Yeah. So it's actually, it's not even just that we use gold, it's that our entire way of living is buttressed by these large corporations. By these, and so if they do things in other parts of the world which are bullying, it's so that we can live well here. We're all captured in this system. Yeah. So it's kind of it's complex, isn't it?
You've said a number of times how complex it is, and you reminded us of that. If Justin Trudeau was here in the Red Room, he would have heard your talk, but he's not here, I don't think. If you could go to the Parliament Hill and talk to the Prime Minister, what would you say to him?
Specifically about the mining situation, or about, okay.
Yeah. Maybe you'll get that opportunity someday.
Maybe. I'd want to share what the community members have told me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd want to share what the community members have told me. And
Yeah.
see where the conversation takes us.
See where it goes. And
Yeah.
like what you shared with us is a great way to launch into a conversation with somebody like that.
Yeah.